Olá, pessoal, boa tarde. Bem-vindos a essa terceira mesa do ciclo sobre ótica cinematográfica. Essa é uma correalização entre o Ateliê Bucareste e a ACASP. Ela será em inglês e posteriormente legendada em português e vai ficar disponível no Facebook do Ateliê Bucareste. Eu gostaria de lembrar que amanhã às 15 horas nós temos uma apresentação das AIS com o Alejandro Alcócer, participação especial da diretora de fotografia Fernanda Tanaka e com moderação do meu amigo Marco Chile. E na semana seguinte, nós teremos a Angenier e a Canon nos dias 29 e 30. Bom, hoje a nossa mesa é sobre a Cooke e os nossos convidados são o Jacob Solitrenick, da ABC, diretor de fotografia, o Daniel Carvalho, da Cooke Optics Brasil e o Eric Johnston, da Cooke Optics América. E eu sou a Giovanna Giordano, sou primeira assistente de câmera e gostaria de agradecer a todos que estão aqui. So I would like to start this webinar introducing our guests. They are Eric Johnston from Cooke Optics, Daniel Carvalho from Cooke Optics Brazil, and Jacob Solitrenick, our director of photography. And all of you, be very welcome. Thanks for everybody being here today, and let's get started. So Eric, I'd like to invite you to start.
Hey everyone. As Giovanna mentioned, I am Eric Johnston with Cooke Americas, and thank you all for being here and joining us online today. We wish we could be with you in person. Daniel runs our office in Sao Paulo, Brazil. We're going to be giving this presentation today, and we would like to make it more of a question and answer. I'm sure you just don't want to sit here and listen to me with a PowerPoint all day. That doesn't tend to be very engaging. So if you guys have questions, please feel free to ask them and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. And if I can't answer them, I will answer it at a later time or make up something good that sounds great. So anyway, Daniel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Olá, pessoal. Daniel, do Cooke Brasil.
All right. So should we get started or?
Yeah, I'd like only to call Jay so you can say hello to everybody. You are muted. Your microphone is muted. Yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Jacob Solitrenick, director of photography. The last 3 feature films I've made was accompanied by Giovanna. So I'm very, very happy to be here in this web seminar about Cooke Anamórficas, and nice to meet you.
Thanks, Jay. And Eric, I think you can start now.
All right, we'll get to the exciting PowerPoint presentation. I know that's why everybody's here. So Daniel, if you don't mind starting that up. And as Giovanna mentioned, this is a joint presentation between Cooke Americas and Cooke Brazil, and also the Bucareste Society. So the next slide, please. This is how I've been starting a lot of these presentations. The question is, why are we here? And it's not the existential question of, why are we all alive? It's why do we do what we do? In terms of why do we get up in the morning and go to work and create commercials, television, feature films, all of this kind of stuff. And when you think about it, the answer is actually quite simple. We're here to tell a story. And that's all that any of this really is. It's the desire for one person or a group of people to tell their story. And Cooke Optics is here to help you, Daniel, if we could get the next slide, to tell your very best story. There are lots of choices in cameras these days. There's lots of choices in lookup tables. There's lots of choices in optics. There's lots of choices with every single piece of equipment that's out there. In many cases, there might be even too many choices than there used to be. You know, a lot of the most famous films of all time were shot with very, very simple equipment, much simpler than what we have access to today. But Cooke has been here and continues to be here and continues to make products to help you tell your very best story. We are a 130-plus-year-old company, so our personal story is quite long. It starts in the silent movie era, and then, of course, goes all the way up to the modern day everything. Every content creation that's made. Oh, actually, Daniel, if you could go back. I'm going to talk about that for a minute. Thank you. Part of our history, we have been involved with everything cinematography, from the 16 millimeter cameras to the 35 millimeter cameras, to the very first Everest expedition that was a big deal, to the Shackleton expedition, where the cameras and ship actually got stuck in the ice. There are actually some Cooke lenses still stuck in the ice up in Antarctica, if anybody wants to go up there and try to get those back. And down here in the corner is something that's very close to my heart. It's George Eastman and Thomas Edison. When I started in this business, I started working for Eastman Kodak Company, and film is something that is very near and dear to my heart. And Daniel, if we could get the next slide. And this is a picture of George Eastman and Thomas Edison, and they're testing one of the world's first motion picture cameras. And this is a quote from Mr. Eastman, that 90% of the 16 millimeter film used in America passes behind lenses made in Leicester. Leicester is the headquarters of Cooke Optics. It was then, and it continues to be today. So all of our lenses are handmade in that factory the same way they were when George Eastman and Thomas Edison first started this whole experiment in cinematography, moving pictures. Next slide, please. So slightly after that, Cooke started to get into 35 millimeter stuff more heavily. And these were the Cooke Speed Panchros, which many of you are probably familiar with because you're still using these Speed Panchros, rehoused in many cases, to shoot your modern day work. That really says something about the look and design of these lenses. That lenses so very, very old could be used today. You know, one of the greatest cinematographers in the world, Vittorio Storaro, he spoke of the Cooke Speed Panchros. His quote was, "They are the world's only true purpose-built cinematographic lens." And this was a few years ago, and he swore up and down that he loved these lenses. And in fact, our boss, Les Ellen, when the Cooke Panchros, the new reimagined Cooke Panchros came out, one of the very first lenses went to Mr. Storaro for testing, and I was told he was quite pleased with it. Next slide. So moving on into the 30s, we had a very new invention, which was color. And the way that we used to have to do color back then was a 3-strip process. It was an RGB, so you actually would need 3 taking lenses to do the 3-strip process. And by doing that, you would get the RGB color to create color. One of the first films that really showcased this, that people today will still be familiar with, was the original Wizard of Oz. So when that transition from black and white to color happened, that was shot on these Cooke lenses with the Technicolor 3-strip process. Next. So from there, we have made a lot of and continue to make a lot of lenses. In the early 1890s, Dennis Taylor, he was essentially the founder of Cooke Optics, and it's been through a number of names, but he had a patent for an optical design known as a triplet. And that what the catalyst for a lot of this was. They continued to build upon that optical design and create new lenses as the years went on. I spoke about the Shackleton expedition. I spoke about the Speed Panchros in the 30s. Cooke developed its first zoom lens, or the first zoom lens, the Cooke Speed Panchro for Technicolor, which was it was a color lens, color zoom lens, which was a very unique lens at that time, and continues to be to this day. The Speed Panchros, they went through 3 generations. There was the Series 1, Series 2, and Series 3, which are probably what most of you are shooting today that are rehoused. Those are the from 1950s on, but it's amazing to see that in many cases a lens that was built 70 years ago is still creating beautiful pictures to this very day. And now, if we could go to the next slide, we get into the more modern Cooke lenses. So in the 80s, there was a lot of work being done with zooms. There were a number of zooms that Cooke put out. 1998 specifically was a very important date for us because it was release of the S4, which we sort of consider the S4 the re-evolution of Cooke, if you will. That is what kicked off all of the modern optical lens designs, and they continue to be true to that heritage today. I'll speak about them in a minute, but you know, if you are familiar with the S4s that were released in 1998 that immediately went on to do some very high profile films, you'll be familiar with the S7s. It's a very familiar lens. It just covers a larger sensor size in this world of large format cinematography. So in 2004, we released a CXX zoom. That was a spherical zoom. We went on to release the 5Is. Those are Cooke's speed lenses, true T1.4 lenses. We are technical to a fault on our speeds. A lot of companies kind of will play a little bit of jiggery-pokery with the speed of their lenses. Cooke lenses are absolutely true to the speed that they are marked. And incidentally, they're also true to the markings on the focus barrel. Each lens is actually put up on a projector when it is done and individually engraved. So we don't have a bunch of scale covers sitting around. We have blank scale covers that are actually individually engraved to each markings on the Cooke lens, which is something very nice. It's a nice handmade accent, if you will, to the lens, which is really nice, and it certainly improves the performance of that lens, and camera assistants will attest to that. Incidentally, the S4s were also the first lens to put the focus and the iris rings in the same position, which pretty much all manufacturers do now, which again helped the assistants by making the changes of map boxes and follow focuses more seamless. You didn't have to move everything, slide everything around on the rails to get it to fit. You could just pop the lens off and continue on, moving faster, and working smarter. So moving on, we had a number of other lenses introduced. We had the S4 minis, which are just like the S4s, except they are stopped slower and they're a little bit smaller. When you make a lens that's slower, it's easier to make it smaller. It's exponentially harder to make a faster lens in terms of design. And moving into the modern era, we had anamorphics. So in 2013, it was time, with the rise of the digital revolution, it was time to introduce a anamorphic lens, and that's what we're going to focus on today. And Cooke has now, by my count, delivered more anamorphic lenses than anybody else in the market. And you can see that reflected in the amount of feature films and high-profile projects that are shot anamorphic. There are just so many high-profile films that are being shot today with our lenses, and there's certainly a reason for that. And then moving on into almost present day, we had a desire to have an anamorphic system. So besides the anamorphic primes, there are also 2 zooms. There's a 35 to 140, and the world's first 10 times anamorphic zoom will be released soon. And that is a 45 to 450, and that is a big puppy. So you're going to need big, strong camera assistants when you take that on set. Next slide. And people think we're a great big company, and we really aren't. This is the company, and this is the team. Although there are a few more people around the world in different offices around the world. This is our factory in Leicester, and these are the artisans that assemble all of the Cooke lenses. You know, if it wasn't for these people doing the magic that they do, we wouldn't have the Cooke look. It's very different than any factory that you've ever visited. And if anybody is ever over in England, close to London, we're about an hour and a half outside of London by train, please feel free to contact me or Daniel. We would be happy to set you up with a factory tour. It's something that everybody universally has enjoyed doing. Next slide. The Cooke design philosophy, we essentially make lenses for three people. Those people are the directors of photography, the DOPs, the assistants, and the owners. Those are the three individuals that Cooke cares the most about because they're the ones that are using our product. Next slide, please. All of the Cooke lenses share a couple common elements. We make Super 35 lenses. We now make full frame lenses. We now make anamorphic primes, anamorphic zooms. And the newest trick in the stable is a full frame anamorphic zoom that I'll be talking about a little bit more in the presentation. So if you think of that, it's a completely new optical design that it's similar to an S7 in the back, and then it's similar to our 2x anamorphic with the cylinder in the front. And using those two elements and creating a completely new optical design, we've created a full frame anamorphic lens, which is quite an interesting lens, and it's a really incredible look. I call it cinematography out of the box. All of these are now color matched, which was not the case with the original Speed Pancros. Those were all over the place. They're the award-winning linear focus system. They're all cam driven, and it's a very smooth, easy to work on system. Our minimum object distance, for the most part, is no more than 10 times the focal length or better, when practical, of course. And all this really means is that for the majority of our lenses, they have very close focus capabilities, which is when you're using them and you need to get a close focus shot, you'll certainly see why that is a nice thing to have. All of the lenses now are compatible, and they come with the eye data boards built in. So they have contacts on the back of the lens. So if you can see this, they have these gold contacts. So if you have a smart camera, you can interface with those. And if you don't worry, because there is a 4-pin connector here that you can go wired into your camera setup using an external box. So if you have the desire for metadata in your analog lens, we can certainly help you with that. Some of the newest things that we're doing are live shading and distortion correction, and all of the major camera and lens manufacturers have signed on to the iTechnology system, and you are getting that out of the box with all of these lenses and all of these cameras. And it's a really nice system, and it's going to help streamline work on set going forward. And then the number one thing why people gravitate towards Cooke lenses is, of course, the Cooke look. Next one. And over the years, being a Cooke, I've had a number of cinematographers' quotes up, and it's always really hard to put your finger on what is the Cooke look, because essentially it's art. One person can take a look at a painting and go, that is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And then the person standing next to them go, my kid could do that. And it really is in the eye of the beholder. And that is what the Cooke look is. It's the beauty in the eye of the beholder. Now, there certainly are a number of things that are inherent within the Cooke look. Part of the Cooke look is it's a more pleasing look. It's a slight fall off. It's a very sharp center with a subtle fall off towards the edge of the frame. And things like this. But when I talk about the Cooke look, this is what really hits home. And Daniel, if you will. So this is a frame from Birds of Prey. And when I look at this individual, I go, he has the Cooke look. This, I couldn't do a better job of explaining, but when I see this, I just know in my mind's eye that this is the Cooke look. And the three pictures I'm going to show here, they're all from 3 large feature films, all shot with Cooke anamorphic 2x special flare. Our anamorphic lenses come two ways. They come regular, if you will, and then the special flare version. The special flare gets confused because people say, oh, it's uncoated. No, it's not. It's a different coating. And it's not just the front element. It's the front element group, which includes the cylinder. So it can't be switched back and forth like an uncoated element on a spherical prime could be, for example. Once we build the lens, and it can go either way. It can be a regular or it can be a special flare. But once it's built, it will stay that way for the duration of its life. People have asked me, could you change it? We could, but it'd be like asking Ferrari to build you, could you pull my car apart and then use all the spare parts and build me another car? It doesn't make a lot of sense to do that. It's actually easier to build a new lens from scratch than to try to adapt a pre-existing lens. Next slide, please. This is a pretty boring image, but it's a very engaging image. This is from A Star is Born. And I like it because it's the back of two people's heads, which is, you can't get much more plain than this. But it's also the Cooke look. It's a very beautiful image, and there's a lot of things to really look at this. But one thing I always point out in the upper left corner is that oval bokeh that you see on the streetlights, those streetlights were round when they were photographed. And part of the beauty of anamorphic, when you squeeze and de-squeeze an image, is it gives you an oval bokeh. So one of the big giveaways that something may be shot in anamorphic is when you see those oval bokehs. Next slide. And then again, this is also, all three of these shot anamorphic 2x SF, and then this is Star Trek. So those images were a little bit different than this. This is a more futuristic Star Trek image, but also on our lenses. So it just shows the breadth of capabilities that you have creatively when shooting these. And that really is the gist of why people shoot anamorphic. They're looking to make their work stand out. And, if you want everything to be perfect, shoot spherical. There are some incredible spherical lenses out there that are rectilinear, and they will keep everything exactly the way that you want it. But that's not what people are looking for. And part of the look of the special flare, if you notice this blue streak, that is what it does. When you shine a light directly into the barrel of the lens, it will flare, and it was made to flare, and it's supposed to give you a nice, pleasing blue streak. And it's something that a lot of people wouldn't like in spherical photography, because there was a number of years where everybody wanted to keep extraneous light out of their lenses. But now these types of effects are really in vogue, and it's just creating a more engaging image that people think is more artistic. Next. So quickly, the Cooke lens family. Next slide. This is what I had talked about before. We have a little bit of a font issue here, but we have all of our lenses. We have the S4s, the S4 minis, the 5Is, which are the speed lenses. We have the new Pancros, the anamorphics, and then the S7s and the anamorphic full frame. So we make a lot of lenses, and all of those anamorphic lenses can be available in either the regular or the special flare coating that I just talked about. You just need to tell your rental house, or you need to tell us when you order them which way you would like us to build them. Next. So this is what I wanted to talk a little bit more in depth about. These are our brand new anamorphic prime lenses. And right now, there's a 25, a 30, 40, 50, 65 macro, going up to 300. For the most part, they're all 2.3 color matched. They include the eye technology, linear iris, and cam focus. They are the true anamorphic front. There's a number of ways to do anamorphic lenses. Cooke's design philosophy is that it needs to be a front anamorph to truly be the lens that we want to make. There's other ways to do it. You can put it in the back and do it that way. But our design philosophy is, if you want to get the true anamorphic effects in the way that we believe they should be rendered, you have to put that anamorphic element in the front of the lens rather than in the back. And here again in this shot in the corner, you see our special flare, and you'll notice it's actually coated on the vertical and horizontal planes. That's why you're getting a streak in both directions. And next slide.
Eric,
Yes.
I would like to make you a question regarding the standard anamorphic primes. What would you consider to be the main differences between the coatings from the anamorphic standard primes to the anamorphic special flare primes?
You know, that's a good question, and I'm sure there is a little bit of difference, but honestly, it's probably very, very close, because you can shoot a set of anamorphic SF with a set of 2 times regular anamorphics and intercut them seamlessly. There might have been a little bit of adjustment that needed to be done on the RGB curve, but for the most part, on the primes, I don't think it was an issue. During the development of the zooms, we did find that the RGB curve needed to be adjusted on those, especially the longer one. And that tended to shift the color of the streak. You started to get a magenta streak or a pinker streak or something like that. So we actually adjusted the RGB curve to get a standardized color, if you will. And so to answer your question, you know, if you went and talked to the guys at the factory, I'm sure there are 2 different coatings for the 2 different lens types, but it's just probably making up for the difference, the little variance in the design. But for the layperson, it's probably indistinguishable.
Thank you.
Any other questions on that?
I don't think so, none so far, but I think you can go ahead on
Okay.
the full frame. Yeah.
And so here's the technical of the full frame. The big difference between these and our regular anamorphics are, of course, that they will cover a larger image size, and that they have a different squeeze factor. They're 1.8, where people are used in the Cooke world to 2 times squeeze factor. When you squeeze and unsqueeze an image, it's a bit of a destructive process. You lose some resolution, and in today's world of streaming video, with all these companies creating all sorts of sets of standards that they may or may not fully understand, it's not a good idea to have a real destructive process, especially when dealing with those guys. So if we would have done a 1.6 squeeze, that would have been a cleaner looking lens in terms of its artifacting, almost to the point of looking spherical. And if you went the other way to 2.0, that would have been almost an overtly anamorphic. It would have been a little too much in full frame. So if you split the difference between those two, you come out with 1.8. And Cooke built a number of lenses and tested all these, but everybody who saw this original 1.8 lens said, that's the one. And I mean, I'm talking about really high-end people in the cinematography world were certainly asked about this, and they said, you know, this is the lens that I would like to shoot. And the 1.8 has really knocked it out of the park, and you see a lot of other manufacturers adopting that same squeeze ratio as well. The first 2 people to put that into the camera natively were Arri with their LF, and then Sony with the Venice. Panasonic just sent me their new Lumix camera the other day, which this is maybe a talk for another day, but my own personal feeling, I went through the DSLR revolution, whenever that was, a while ago. I think there's going to be a new mirrorless evolution, because this Panasonic Lumix camera that I have, I don't know, it's $3,000, $4,000. And of course I put a $36,000 lens on the front of it. But that's what I can see happening. I can see people going out and purchasing these cameras and then going to the rental houses to rent the lenses to put on them. But there's 2 types of things in the world. I sort of tend to look at the cinematography world as there are fads and there are trends. And anamorphic, like 3D, is a fad. It comes around and then people go, and then it goes away and then it comes back. And then when James Cameron releases, you know, Avatar 2 and 3, it'll be back and then it'll go away again. Anamorphic is a trend. It's not going away. The amount of stuff that's being shot anamorphically grows exponentially every year. And there's a reason for that. Like I touched upon before, people want their work to stand out, and anamorphic is something that makes it stand out. So, next slide. So why shoot anamorphic? This didn't come out so well on a Zoom meeting, but all this really is it's the same shot in spherical, and then the top is spherical, and then the bottom is anamorphic. So as I touched on before, if you just look at the lights in the background that are a bit out of focus, you know, they're round because they were round lights and spherical. But when you squeezed and de-squeezed them, it created a more oval shape here in the bottom. And as my boss once said, actually said it multiple times, if you can't see the difference between these two images, you might want to look for another job. And it's easier to see on a big screen, but there is absolutely a difference in the look of a side-by-side shot in spherical versus anamorphic. So, and if you want something that is more realistic, that is a true representation of the real world, shoot spherical. If you want something that's going to be a little bit wilder, a little bit more creative, a little bit out of the box, that's probably a good anamorphic project. But you're the storyteller. It's really up for you to decide. Next, please. So what we have here, we have a Super 35 frame. This was a 4x3, 4 long, 3 high. And then this new full frame 35 is a 3x2. So you're starting with two different aspect ratios. Okay, next slide, please. So when you squeeze this is the 1.8 squeeze. These basketballs are looking quite oval. Of course, we know that a basketball is round. This is what it looks like on the frame squeezed in 3:2. When you de-squeeze this fully on the full frame anamorphic, it yields a 2:7:1 aspect ratio, which is just a little bit shy of what I believe was called super technicolor back in the day. And Daniel, if you could go back to one slide, I just want to point out one thing. We thought that it was going to be cropped on the edges to yield like a 2:39, 2:41 aspect ratio. People are really liking this 2:7:1. A lot of the projects that people are coming back to me with feedback on have said, you know what, we were framing for the 2:41, but we like 2:7:1 so much that we started framing for the whole thing, and we think, you know, we're going to keep it. So it's really the choice of the creatives, but it's pretty neat. It certainly is. I'm looking forward to shooting my first project with the effect. Sorry about that. Next slide, please. So this is what it looks like. The basketballs look like de-squeezed. So they're round again, and they fill that whole aspect ratio. So it's real simple. If you want to think about anamorphic in this way, if you take a piece of paper, you fold it in half, and then you unfold it. That's essentially what you're doing with the image. And that unfolding is creating all of these artifacts and lovely things that come along with anamorphic. So next, please. Again, we've been around. This is just a very small representation of what we've done, you know, and I see some silent movie era stuff in the corner, and then, you know, going all the way up to the modern films. But it's amazing to see how many things over the years have been shot on Cooke. Some of my favorite films have been shot on Cooke, and people that don't know who we are, they know the work that's been done with our lenses over the years. And that's a very cool thing. Next. And then this is the chairman of Cooke, Les Zellin. And this is the color of Film and Digital Times, or excuse me, Film and Digital Times. I believe it was last month. This is John Fowler's publication, who's been a mentor to myself through my entire career. And interestingly enough, when John started this magazine decades ago, it seems, the very first factory tour was of Cooke. And very recently, we're still in the same factory, but we have redone it. We added a second level, a mezzanine, all this kind of stuff. And John went back and did another factory tour. And for those of you that want to go more in depth into how our lenses are made and what's going on at the factory, which we make lenses unlike anybody else in the whole world, which is why, again, there is the Cooke look. I often challenge people to name a product that the Chinese haven't copied and you can't buy on Amazon. Think about that. Think about that. And we have a product just like that. And there's a couple of reasons for that, but it's a very interesting world that we live in. And to be able to do those two things is honestly a sense of pride for myself. So next slide. And that's it. So we've been innovating since 1893. That's when we were founded. We have a couple of websites. We have cookeoptics.com, which is the main website. We have Cooke Optics TV, which is about the art and science and craft of cinematography. And this is for everybody's work. And then if you want something more specific about Shot on Cooke, it's Shot on Cooke. We have a website for projects that were specifically shot there. So between these three resources, there's just a vast amount of information available to you out there. And we encourage you to visit them and to check them out. And if you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch with Daniel or myself. And we're happy to help. You know, thank you guys, because if it wasn't for our customers, we wouldn't have any need to make any lenses, and we wouldn't be here doing what we love to do. So it's really about all of you guys. You know, if you guys didn't use what we make, we wouldn't be here to share this experience with you. And we really do thank you.
Thank you, Eric, for the presentation. So I have a first question from the audience. It's from Gustavo Fattori, a colleague of ours. And his question is, thinking on the history of our recent digital industry, we can notice a size and weight reduction on camera bodies and accessories, almost at the same rate of the quality's increase. If we put it in a general way, the timeline of the optics engineering, especially Cooke, goes strongly on the reverse of the cameras. Can you talk a little bit about this?
Well, all the camera and battery manufacturers are making their stuff smaller so we can make our lenses bigger. When you design something, it's a process that not many people have been through. And there's an old saying, you can get it, what is it, smarter, faster, better, pick two. It's very similar for lens design. We could manufacture smaller lenses and they would be very, very expensive and they would take a long time to come out. It doesn't mean that we're not looking at those types of things. We certainly are. And honestly, one of the largest complaints we get about Cooke lenses is the size. And that is coming from a place where camera movement has actually changed. When I started, there wasn't that many ways to move a camera, and the amount of ways there are to actually get camera movement now have grown exponentially, just like everything else. And I personally believe that that was one of the drivers towards smaller cameras, was the ease of moving these things. And what ends up happening, like with a movie or something, you put our lens on the rig, one of these gyro stabilized rigs, and it immediately goes down. And that's just because they are not meant to carry the payload capacity of these larger cameras. You know, and I know it's not a great answer, but people that are having that problem, I often recommend them to my friend Kurt Shaler, who is the product manager at ARRI for the Artemis Trinity. His rig will hold anything. And so if you are having a problem with flying our lenses in one of those things, I recommend you do look at the Artemis. And I know Movi is working on some higher capacity rigs, and as is everybody else. But we do hear your feedback. We also have Pancro Classic lenses that are significantly smaller and lighter weight. The optical units in those, in many cases, are only about this big. So even though the housing might be a little bit larger, the actual weight reduction in that lens is significant over some of our bigger lenses like S7s or anamorphic full frame. So I hope that answered your question.
Cool, great. Jay, now I have a question for you. How do you see the comeback of the anamorphics? primes since they started in the 70s, and how do you look at it or expect to use the anamorphic looks when you're doing research for a project?
Well, I think back in the 20th century, in Brazil, it was very rare to have anamorphic lenses disposable for us. So I think I never, as an assistant cameraman, I never shot anamorphic. I remember when Panavision came to Brazil, even though there was difficult to have anamorphic sets in Brazil. But then when Cooke and some other manufacturers started to manufacture anamorphic lens, modern anamorphic lens, that became a reality for us. Even though for feature films, if you don't have the budget, you cannot have anamorphic disposable for shooting, because mostly of the sets are used in commercials. So it was not a reality, and then it became a reality, and nowadays it's possible to shoot with anamorphic, which is a great advantage for us as creative and technical creators. So I'd like very much to shoot anamorphic also, but it depends a lot on the project. And I think especially when you shoot anamorphic, comparing the two frames that Eric showed us, you have to think also with the director and the art director about using anamorphic lens to have the best of it. I mean, if you have sets, internal shot with no lights on the shot, it won't give you the best look that anamorphic can bring you. So that's a question. Also, anamorphics are more, it's not so high-speed lenses as spherical lens, sorry. And so there are questions. The weight is higher than the spherical lenses, so you have to judge your project very well to choose to use anamorphics. Does that respond to the question?
Yes, very much. So going into this field, the last project, the last feature film we did together, we shot on Cooke anamorphics. And what do you think influenced you to choose the anamorphic look? And if you considered using the special flare set instead of the regular anamorphic set?
That's a good question, because it was a project that we passed through different thinkings. It's very common when I start talking to the director. One of the questions I've made is whether we shoot 185 or 239, and if so, 239, then spherical or anamorphic. That's a question I always ask the director. I involve the producer and the art director on that answer. And in this case, they didn't thought about just having 239 shoot frame. And when I suggested that they really enjoyed, they asked for me to send some information and some examples of it. And they decided to go with it. And then the director thought about shooting anamorphic. So we didn't have a very high budget. So the production tried to contact some rental houses and see the possibilities of it. And the first one that came to reality was to shoot with Cooke's special flare. We didn't have the time and the money to make tests, which is, I think, very strange for American cinematographers and foreign cinematographers when we say that. We're starting two films in the same the same project, and how can we not have the time and the money to shoot tests? But that's a reality sometimes in our country, in our situation, and that was it. So I started to research for the special flares, and I kind of felt that it was too much of a flare for the story we were going to tell. And I kind of back up from it. I was not sure that it wasn't too much. I'm not a very fan of interference on the image. I prefer like like, for instance, Roger Deakins never put a filter or never put a flare on his image, and I like that very much. It kind of distracts the audience and makes, I think, for a beauty thing or for something very fancy, then amount of flare is very welcome. But too much flare, I thought it was kind of distracting. So I refused that way, and we went to spherical lenses, and that was it until one week before we start shooting, when there was another rental company offering us a package that was very good for the production in terms of price. And then we had this option of having the Cooke anamorphic standard, no special flare. And we went for it, although I was very in doubt because there was supposed to be a lot of handheld cameras. We were shooting with Alexa Mini, and well, the weight of the anamorphics was something that I was worried about. So that I went to the rental company, rental house, made some tests, not shooting, but holding the camera, trying to balance it. And I thought that putting the camera very behind my shoulder and having the lens very close to my shoulder, I could have a good balance, even though the lens were heavy. And so we went for it, and we had the green signal from our production company. The director agreed for me to having this payload, extra payload, but I was comfortable with it. So we went for it. There was just this to compliment on this special, on this project, the director wanted to make to be very close to the actors in some situations. And that for anamorphic was something that we were worried about, me and Giovanna, because the lenses don't have that much close focus as spherical lens. So we were trying to understand if we could use a close-up lens attached to it, or what was the best way to have it. And then the rental house allowed us to use a 65 millimeters macro, which is beautiful lens, one of the best on the set in terms of definition and aberrations, also technical stuff. And so, but it was very heavy, a very heavy lens. So normally on handheld, we didn't use it unless there is no other options. So I think that was, at the end, what was interesting thing to use anamorphic, and I was very happy with the results.
Good, that's great. Eric, if you could comment a little bit on the construction of the 65 millimeter macro prime of the anamorphics, because it's a lens that brings a lot of different possibilities to the DOP, and also very different characteristics, technical characteristics for the camera assistant.
Well, I think it was unusual at that point in time to have a macro in your anamorphic set. I know myself, the first thing that struck me about it was saying, you know, macro or anamorphics are not known for being very close lenses. And the first time that I put that on a projector, I mean, I'm not kidding, you have to push the projector all the way to the wall. I mean, it's like touching the wall. That's how close focus these that lens is. And it's very cool. I have not done a whole lot of macro. I actually shot a piece with our new 65 Pancro, which is a 4:1 macro. It's a little bit different than the anamorphic macro. But we also released 3 new 1:1 macros in the S7s, full frame macros, a 60, a 90, and a 150. So those are going to be 3 full frame macro lenses that are going to be available for you to do very similar shots to what you did in the anamorphic. You know, in terms, Giovanna, of the design, I'm not sure exactly what text did to that. Daniel might be able to speak about that because it's an anamorphic, but I mean, the design of that, the bones are a macro. And there's a number of things that have to go on to be able to get it to be a macro. And one thing that is unique about our lenses is we're not per se a still photography lens company, although we do make a couple lenses for large format cameras. Every one of our lenses is built from the ground up. We don't take a part of or pieces of still photography lenses and then create a cinema lens. Every one of our designs is built from the ground up. So when Cooke made that, they wanted to make a purpose-built anamorphic close focus lens, and that's what they did. And you're certainly not the first person to tell us that that is one of your favorite lenses in that set. People absolutely love that lens.
Great. Then just going into this subject, I'd like to ask you, Eric and Jay, about what are the advantages of having such a smaller lens set of anamorphics in comparison to the regular size set of the Cooke primes, for instance. Like, what does that bring of options and limitations to a DP shooting its project?
I'll let Jacob field that one, but I'll tell you, the world that I came from was always very cinematography, and the complaints I always got was there's not enough lenses in the set. This new lens set, because you only have 6 lenses, and I need 16 lenses to blah, blah, blah. And then when I started to work with anamorphic, people are like, oh, no, I can have 2, 3 lenses? What? Which was shocking to me. Sets, and I mean, that's a really short set when you have 2, 3. But in anamorphic, people love it. I mean, Jacob, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, when I started as a cinema cameraman or making films in the 80s, in 1984, the sets, the spherical sets had 5 lenses. So that was not nothing to complain. That was what we were accustomed to use. Then in the 90s, well, with the new lenses, the Zeiss standards, and you could have 12 lenses on a set. And then I think everyone is very accustomed to it. And of course, it's a great advantage to choose between a 32, a 35, a 40 millimeter lens. But for me, like, I always think about Ozu, the great Japanese director that used only the 50 millimeters lens. And I think that's quite interesting. When you have all the options, it's great. But if you also are reduced in options, you have to be creative. It's the best you can. So that's not really a matter for me. Although in this film that we shot at the end of last year, me and Giovanna, I felt, because we have the 32 and the 50, but not the 40 millimeter lens. And I think for the anamorphic set, that was something that we felt that we could have better shots with a 40, because the 32 has a kind of tends to create a different aspect ratio, not aspect ratio. How do you call it, Giovanna? It's kind of
the distortion of borders of
The
the edges
focus.
and yes, exactly.
yeah, the 32 was a little bit too much. So sometimes we even went to the 25, getting a little bit closer, because I felt that the 32 has this, so I longed for the 40 in this special case. But I've done some years ago another feature film with anamorphics, and it was, I think, the first feature film in Brazil shot in anamorphic with a newer lenses, and we only have 4 lenses, and I have to adapt myself and the director also to these 4 lenses. But it was great. We did the feature film very, very happy with it. So it's more of a compromise, and how do you enjoy using it or not. Of course, I do have a set of spherical lens with 10, 20 lenses, 13 actually, and I love to use it, but I have my preferences among them. And normally I prefer the 40 over the 32, the 28 over the 32, but that's also a matter of taste. And so for me, shooting anamorphic with less lenses, if I want to shoot it and I'm happy with shooting anamorphic, that's not a deal.
You know, I think Jacob brings up an important point. When you have a smaller set of lenses, you become much more intimately aware of those lenses, and you know how they work. I mean, if you're sitting in front of a table of 30 lenses, you're never going to get to know, well, maybe you will, but the odds of getting to know the personality of each one of those lenses while you're trying to do a million different things on your job, it's going to be tough. But I mean, when you have a limited set of 3 or 4 lenses, it might actually help in some instances. You know, there's a psychological thing called, I think, the paradox of choice, that once you get to too many choices that humans have, you start making worse choices. You actually make better choices when you have limited amount of choices to come from. And I think that is probably pretty relevant to this conversation.
Yeah, interesting. I have a question from Marcelo Trota. He's a DOP from ABC, and he would like to know how the special flare lens would behave in a project meant to have an HDR delivery. Flaring and glaring may interfere on the general contrast of a given scene, and sometimes this may make the color grading a little tricky. So that's for Eric.
Sure, and the whole premise behind special flare was that you only got these flares, and I heard what Jacob said earlier is what a number of people had said when they were first going to shoot these lenses. They were like, oh, I don't want this to look like, they'll pick on Star Trek. I don't want this to look like, Star Trek. And then, having been on the set of Star Trek recently, those guys tell me, if you guys had a special flare lens, we would absolutely take those, because they're using streak filters over these lenses to achieve a lot of their look. Now, that being said, you're not going to get any streaking unless you point a key light directly into the barrel of the lens. So if you don't have a light going into the barrel, you're not going to get, for the most part, those flares. So it is controllable. When I first started, one of the things that I did, because I got a million questions on this, is I got a regular 25 millimeter anamorphic and then a special flare 25 millimeter anamorphic, and I had a Flanders monitor with a split screen, and I used to go all around the world and I would do this test. And a lot of people had told me, oh, there's no difference between anamorphic, the SF, and the regular, unless you're shining a light down the barrel. And I personally did not find that to be true. They render images differently, even without the flare. And the best way that I could, and it's very subtle, don't get me wrong, but whenever we did the Pepsi challenge, A or B, do you like A or do you like B? It was always B, and B was always special flare, 9 times out of 10. And people didn't know what they were looking at. And the only way I could describe it was that without the flares, the image from the special flare is more structured, if that makes sense. There's just something a little bit more structured about the way that image is rendered than the regular version. And people just seem to find it a little bit more pleasing, even without blasting a light down the barrel and getting those streaks on the horizontal and vertical planes. But you're right, if there's a bunch of artifacts and stuff in post-production, it is what it is. But it goes the other way too, because if you shoot something spherical and then you want to add all those special effects in later, that's also a bit of a challenge, I would believe.
Can I make a comment on special flares? And well, I haven't used the special flares because I was afraid of being too much for the film. The film was not a saga or something. It was more intimate film. And but I noticed that the standards anamorphic, they don't have that much flare as an anamorphic lens was supposed to have. So I think I understand that's because I understand why you've done this special flare. That's because the coating is so good on the standard lenses that they don't have that much flare.
I spoke before about fads and trends, and certainly anamorphic being a trend. But one of the overarching trends in anamorphic is to get more artifacts and more effects. When we were shooting film, it was the other way. People wanted things to be much truer representation to life. But in anamorphic in the digital world, it almost seems like the crazier, the better. In many instances, that's 100% true. I was actually in Brazil with Daniel. I think we were at one of these rental houses, and I saw somebody checking out a set of lenses that were sold from Kavon in California at Camtech. And I just said, "What are those lenses? Those are crazy." And I mean, looking myself at these, I couldn't have envisioned anything I would have shot with them. But these people, I have never seen people more excited to go out and shoot some funky lenses than this group of individuals was. And so it's all about taste. And for the story they were going to tell, it was going to be great.
Cool. And in this same subject, so the Cooke Anamorphics, they are pretty recent. They were launched in 2013. So how long was the research process, and what did Cooke think it was the main goals, what it wanted to achieve in aesthetic and look wise when launching this new set of lens?
That's an interesting question. It's not one that I've actually gotten before, but I will steal from Les's presentations in answering that. He was asked from day one, I believe, why don't you make anamorphic lenses? And he was very reticent to do that until the digital revolution came along. And then he said, now it's time to make an anamorphic lens. And it seems like it was the time. The market was absolutely there. What special flare, SF, actually stands for is super funky. Okay? That's 100% true. But the CEO is a little bit more conservative than Les would be, said you can't put super funky on the checkout list. It can't be the Cooke super funky lenses. So if that gives you any indication where this project was going, I'm sure that they were looking at all of these old, Panavision and everybody else, all these beautiful old anamorphic images that were made and wanting to replicate certain aspects of that. But at the end of the day, they changed SF to special flare, and it became two sets of lenses. So you could get a more traditional, less flary set of lenses, or you could get something that's a little bit crazier, if you will. But in terms of the actual project, that was just 2013. Unfortunately, I was not around during that time. But
okay. So there's a question from Pedro, and he is asking about the evolution of lens, and what would you think in how Cooke is in position to the evolution in lens making?
Well, you know, it's it's interesting. I gotta sort of watch what I say these days. There was an instance. No, I'm not even gonna tell. I can't tell that story. I can't tell the story, but it's a good story. We've been around, as I said, for over 130 years, and let me be polite in saying that most of these guys have not. Okay. And there's nothing to say that they're going to be in the future. My background in this industry was very highly based in mechanical accessories very early on. And when I started in mechanical accessories, you had Crozeal. We had Red Rock Micro for like the new DSLR stuff. You had Crozeal in broadcast, and you had Arri in cinema. The world was very orderly. I lost track years ago. I mean, there must be 1 million people that do mechanical accessories now. Well, half of those people have gotten out of it. Now they want to do optical accessories, including optical lenses. And, you know, it never ceases to amaze me when I'm at a trade show and I see somebody trying to sell one lens that isn't finished yet, but people are buying it because everybody wants something for nothing in this industry. You know, everybody wants to hold out the goal for these, you know, the $1,000 anamorphic lens set that's just as good as the Cooks and all this kind of stuff. And unfortunately, from a design standpoint, you just don't get something for nothing. You know, there are other anamorphic lenses that cost a lot less than ours. But what I have found is when people start to shoot those lenses, they understand the limitations of them. I don't want to say shortcomings, they're limitations in what they do. The Cooke lenses have much less limitations, but you're paying for that, if you know what I mean. And then it's exceedingly hard to create a set of lenses and then do that another 350 times. We have about 350 sets of anamorphic in the world. And to be able to replicate that process time after time after time and have any one of those sets of lenses from Brazil, from LA to Atlanta to Mexico, you know, come together and work in unison is not an easy feat by any means. But we are very well positioned for the future. We continue to introduce, I mean, we just introduced last month 7 new lenses between our different ranges. And our hardest problem when we get together and have a meeting is deciding what to build next, because there are so many different things that we could build next. We're simply limited by our capacity and the output time, because we are not a mass-produced product. Every single thing is handmade in that factory in Leicester, and we're at 100% capacity. So building one thing means we're not building another. And it's a very interesting position to be in from a sales or management standpoint, because we actually don't have a warehouse. Usually it's like, oh, you know, we got to get rid of this and get rid of this. You know, all these are stacking up out here. Every single lens that's made is made for a customer, and it's packaged up on a table and shipped out. It never gets put in a warehouse because we don't have one. We don't hold inventory. And it's a double-edged sword, because people come along and think, oh, I got a big bag of money, you know, oh, can you get me my lenses next week? And it's like, I'd love to take your big bag of money, but they're just not built. We have to build them for you, and that's a process, and there's no speeding up their process. And trust me, we could speed it up, but you're not going to like what comes out the other end, and they're going to come back. So, I mean, it's a process that needs to be done correctly, and it can't be rushed, and it can't be cheated, because a lot of these things can be empirically measured, you know? So it is what it is. And to get back, I guess, to the original question, we've been through all of these learning curves and growing pains, if you will. I mean, the amount of time we've been doing it, we've done it all. There was just an instance recently where we had to essentially cut glass. And I had to laugh and say, you know, how many of these other companies can just take blocks of glass and start cutting them? It's pretty few and far between. But that's the stuff. I mean, we used to smelt glass, our own glass. many, many years ago. But that's its own business in and of itself. Cooke has no longer smelt its own glass. But if we need to, we can still do some very high-end engineering things to make that happen. And I know just from being in manufacturing all these years, smaller companies simply can't do that. You know, if they would have faced this problem, that lens just wasn't going to get built. And that's certainly not the only problem you're going to have in one of these projects. So it's a strange new world out there, and there's a ton of choices, but there's a reason why when you look at the list of films and what they're shot on, that the Cooke name is continuously at the top of that list. So, and we know what has yielded us success in the past, and we're just going to continue, hopefully, to emulate those same things and hope that it brings us success in the future. So, we're just looking at the trends. People think that the camera manufacturers and the lens manufacturers talk to each other. Not really, not as much as we should. This is the first time I ever knew of, when I joined the company, that we had a set of lenses for full frame, in that instance, a brand new set of lenses for a new technology that was ready before the cameras were. That's never happened in my career before. But when you're a leader, you can do that, and Cooke absolutely is a leader, and you can see when other companies emulate your formula for success, even your squeeze ratio or whatever it might be. You're doing something right.
Mm-hmm. So. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for all of that. It's valuable information. And in this matter, I'd like to ask you, you talked about how anamorphics are a trend and they're not just going to fade. So how was the process of having the full frame anamorphic primes built and ready before cameras were already on the market and ready for use? And is this part of a strategy of trying to incorporate anamorphic looks into the full frame ratio?
Yes, it is. That's exactly what it was. Full frame came out. And full frame to us, we actually got Jared's camera from Red, which I forget exactly which one it was at the time. It was a white one. But it was the first monstro, great big giant sensor. And when you look at our diagonal coverage of 46.33 millimeters, that comes directly off of that sensor. And had the picture height or picture width on subsequent sensors from Arri or Panasonic or Sony been higher or wider, we would have all the manufacturers would have been in trouble. Thankfully, most everything that's came since then has fit within that picture height and width. So knowing that you have a 3:2 aspect ratio sensor, what can you do with this? Well, spherical, okay, everybody's doing spherical. Why not we had such great success with anamorphic. Why not make anamorphic lenses for full frame, which was exactly what we did. The biggest problem, as I understand it, that Cooke had was figuring out the squeeze ratio. Because as I alluded to earlier, 1.6 was too clean, almost spherical-like, and then 2.0 was too destructive in terms of loss of resolution in pixels. And 1.8 was just the happy medium, and it was perfect. The math actually works out to a little bit different number. If you do the math and you make that lens, which they did, it was a nice lens, but it wasn't cinematographic out of the box. When we took that first lens out of the box at a trade show and put it up on the camera, we all stood around with our mouths open because it was just gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. I've never seen anything like that before. So.
Cool. And okay, so now going back to Jay, I have a question for you. Since you've been a DOP from shooting on film, how do you think choosing to use a set of anamorphic lens give you the possibility of choose it blindly, like without having made any tests before, and just because of being able to see the results on set, not having to wait for dailies or for the material to come? Were you satisfied to see how the construction of your image look was on set?
Well, actually, as I mentioned before, not always we have the chance to make tests or as much tests as we'd like to. So I rely a lot on the films I see and on the big screen as a guide to my choices of equipment. And that was always, I mean, you see a film, a picture, a feature film, and you know which equipment was used to it, and that's a guide. And I rely a lot on it, and I know also that these great manufacturers are incredible. So I know a Cooke lens, if it's okay on the technical tests, I know that it will give me incredible image. And so going kind of blind to a feature film, like the first feature film I've done with an anamorphic lens wasn't Cooke, was another manufacturer. The great reference, it was a black and white picture. And the great reference for that image was the film called Arizona. It's a beautiful film. It was shot with an old anamorphic Panavision lens. So you can see that on the film, the rack of focus was enormous. And that kind of, well, I wasn't sure which camera, which lens I was using before when we were in the first conversations. But I advised the director on how we were shooting to take care of rack focus with anamorphics. But then when I first tested the lenses I was going to use, I was shocked because there was no breadth, no zooming on the focus pulling. That was very astounding for me. You could see that the evolution of the technology was all in that lenses. So sometimes you don't have to make tests, and you don't have to be as ready as you would like to know that can work. If you have a good camera, good lenses, good crew, you can go for it. And of course, if you can see on the dailies, you can see on the set on a good monitor, you're much more covered than on the days that maybe you would see the dailies only one week after. Some films I've done, well, it was crazy not to see anything. And if I didn't learn like for instance, I've done a workshop with Kodak, and then when I learned to use the speed test to know which ISA, which ISO was my film, if I didn't learn that before I was shooting a feature film, then I probably haven't done my second feature film, because the first one I was supposed to use a film, a negative, that was so off of the 500 ASA that was supposed to be, that I was going to destroy my career even before I started. So making the transition to digital was a very good thing. You can go further, and sometimes without knowing the results beforehand. You can share with the crew, with your crew, with the art direction. So I like very much to be working with digital image. And also the new lenses from the 90s to here, they're much more, well, technical, mechanical. It was a great, when the S4 started and was launched on the market, the difference on the mechanical it was so easy to focus it. I used to have my Zeiss standard lenses, which are good lenses. In terms of definition, it's not that much big difference, but in terms of mechanical focus, the precision, well, that's a gift for the assistant cameraman, and also camera person, sorry. And also the flare, the coating that came with the S4 was an incredible thing, because you can like to have the flare with as Eric said, when there's a light on the frame. But when you have a window with the highlights from the window, on the old lenses, it kind of distracts the image. If you have a window here, a big, large, highlight, it will corrupt the image. It will make the blacks tend to blue. And from the S4 on, we didn't have that problem anymore. You could have your T-stop wide open and don't be as much afraid as the old sets. So I hope I can be understood with my English and answer the question.
Yes, of course, it was perfect.
I don't know if you know, Jacob, but you just gave away one of the biggest cinematographer secrets of all time. You know, I can't tell you how many people, I mean, big, accomplished individuals have shot simply because, like, the latest one is A Star is Born. So Matthew Leibetweek lensed that on Cooke Anamorphic SFs, as he usually does for most of his feature films. And so many directors of photography don't even want to do any tests. They're like, what did Matty shoot? Yeah, that's what I'm doing on my next one. I mean, it's that powerful, because they see the images that he, in that instance, created, and they just say, that's what I want my work to look like. A lot of people won't say that publicly, obviously, for a number of reasons. But the amount that I see that happens, it happens a lot.
Yeah, that's amazing. But Jay, I wanted you to comment a little on the differences you felt from using the Master Prime anamorphics on your previous feature, and then in comparison to the Cooke anamorphics, since what both lens primes, the proposals are very different, and one is a lot harsher while Cooke is very smooth and has this very ethereal, organic look to it. And how did you feel when watching your final the final cut of this new film we did?
Well, both films, one was shot in black and white, to be black and white. It was shot color, but I made a lookup table and to be black and white. So I saw on the set in black and white. And both camera and lenses just arrived in Brazil, direct from the factory. So it was brand new. So, I mean, that was perfect. I think that makes some difference on the set compared to the cookies we used on the last film, because we don't know what these cookie lenses suffered from the years. I mean, so I was a little bit. It's hard to put, because when I compare Zeiss lenses with the cookie lenses, both spherical, they have different moods, different fall-offs and resolution, but they're both technically very precise. And this set of anamorphics wasn't that precise, as we saw on our tests, the tests you've made with our crew. And I was a little bit worried about that, because like the 32 has a worse resolution on the corners than the 25 or the 50. So that was not the set so perfect as I was expecting, because of the Cooke projects. And one Cooke set that I love very much is the i5, which I think it's a little bit more harsh maybe than the S4, but I like it very much. And also sometimes we have to shoot full open or close to 2.4. And when you have a high-speed lenses, you can go for it a little bit with a little bit of safety than shooting at S4 wide open. So I was a little, especially with the 32 millimeters, that make me a little bit unsafe on that matter. And that's why I longed for a 40 on the set, but we didn't have. Then when we put the 65 macro on the camera and made all the shots, and that was a very new lens, we saw that it was, wow, marvelous. So maybe the years of usage could make that difference. So that's why it's difficult to compare the film that I shot in 2014 to a shot on the end of 2019.
Okay, thank you. And so Eric, I've read during my research a lot of this definition of the Cooke anamorphics having a saddle effect or pincushion effect on the look. Could you comment a little bit on that?
That is one of the inherent effects within our anamorphic, is that pincushion effect. It's in the 2x anamorphics. You also will see it in the anamorphic full frames when you get to shooting them. You know, you guys were alluding to a set of lenses before that are also anamorphic lenses that are probably technically, if that's what you're going for, the best anamorphic lenses that have ever been made. The problem is they look like spherical lenses. So people kind of scratch their head and go, yeah, these are great, but are they too great? Because they look like spherical. That's not what I really want here. And so they, you know, will transition to whatever it might be. In this case, it's Cooke lens. And that's the reason that they are transitioning, is to get all of this stuff that isn't inherent within a spherical lens. And one of those things is going to be pincushion distortion. I mean, there's no two ways about that. And it's the director of photography's job to minimize, you know, what you don't want to do as a DOP is have the audience taken out of the story. Anything that you do that jars the audience, that makes them go, what just happened, isn't good. But as long as the DOP can work within the parameters, and this is what I had talked about before, when you have a shorter set of lenses, you get to intimately know, like Jacob does, oh, you know, the 32 does this, the 25 does this. So it's his job as an artist to be able to work within the parameters and knowing just how far you can push that without it being too much. Or without retreating to the safety of something like a spherical lens that you know is going to give you that more rectilinear look, but it's not going to have this cinematographic look that you might be looking for. So nothing's right, nothing's wrong. It's really whatever you want to do. I guess some things do turn out better than others.
Can I just comment on my previous answer? At the end, because that impression, those impressions came much of the test, the technical test that we've done, but shooting the picture and seeing the result, that was quite amazing for me, because actually anamorphics, it's a great, you have compromises like the focus puller, like Giovanna, passed through difficult times. We've done some long handheld shots. The director wanted to do just one take, and we asked for more takes. That was kind of the whole crew needs to understand what is shooting with anamorphic, not only us. As I said before, the art director, to put lights on the set and everything else. But seeing the result is very pleasant for me, definitely.
Jay, I will share the screen now with one of the shots, the frames from the film we did. And I wanted you to comment a little on the use. You already talked about a little on the use of having the main sources of light in frame and coming from the background. And how did you feel about it, since we shot in an amusement park, and we also had a lot of car scenes and things, flares and glares coming through. So let me just share the screen and then you can comment a little bit more about it, please. Okay.
Well, that was one of the references. Of course, references are not very easily followed. One of the references was, for the director, was the series Euphoria. And when you see how it was done and the amount of money and possibilities and time they had, 65 millimeter camera, the high format, large format camera, ARRI camera, and DNA lenses. So everything they had, it's hard to have a reference like that. We've done this shot on an amusement park, I think that's the name. And this was a camera that was fixed on this carousel. And I put some lights that was changing, but you can see that there is not much flare. Although the lights on the frame are high on exposition, but the lens holds the flare very well. It's not something that causes flare. So that one was one thing that the director maybe was unpleasant. He wanted more than this. But I was very pleased with this frame, the changing of lights. If you could see the scene, the light on the actors were changing colors, and that was very, I think, very magical. The camera was turning around with the apparatus, so I liked very much this frame. That's why I put it. And well, I think in this case it was probably the 25 millimeter lenses, which was a very good lens in technical aspects. And when you see the image, it was larger than the 239. It was 266 because it's a 1.33 frame, 2 times anamorphic. So you have to cut a little bit on the sides on post-production. And that image, it's just the lookup table that we have on the Alexa camera. It was not from the post-production, which I think I didn't change that much. I think at the end of the post-production, this frame is quite this one, I think. Yeah.
Cool. And Eric, could you comment? There was a participant that asked for more commenting on HDR, but it wasn't really specific. But if you could talk about a little bit.
That's really a camera question. You know, that has to go with the camera, not the lenses. You know, when I first started, we got all excited about high definition. And there was 2K, 3K, 4K, 6K, 8K, you know, a lot of Ks going on. But when I worked for a different company, we were in another country, and they sat us in a theater and they said, okay, which one of these is 4K? And of course it was, you know, it was meant to show you that the less resolution image looked better. You thought that that was the higher resolution image. It was all very subjective. But I guess the takeaway from this is our lenses have incredibly high resolving power. I mean, if you put them on a projector and measure line pair per millimeters, they're up there with any of the other cinematographic lenses. So you're going to be able to cover HDR, you're going to be able to cover 2K, you're going to be able to cover 8K, you're going to be able to cover 10K when it comes out. You know, the resolution is inherent within our lens. It's just the pixel size and the sensor and the camera and the architecture and the color science and all that jazz that goes on inside your digital sewing machine that's going to work with HDR. So, but you can stick a Cooke lens on the front of it, and future proof is what to take away from that.
Can I comment something on it? The last 3 feature films I've done, we had already the HDR option, but well, it's expensive nowadays also, even, and we didn't go for it. But my reason to ask the production to decide beforehand, it's because the image is quite different, and especially the skin and the makeup appears a lot on HDR. Also, you have to lead with the highlights differently. But for me, the great concern was the makeup, to appear the makeup. And when I saw some tests on films I shot in HDR, the makeup was very, how can we call it? You see too much the makeup. And I think, and unpleasant a little bit for the skin. So I think Cooke lenses for this matter will be a good choice, because they have this, although have great resolution, have some softness, which is quite pleasing, I think, for the HDR. That's my opinion, but HDR, if I was going to shoot it, then I have to test. I cannot make a feature film in HDR and not test it, as I do on SDR. That's my opinion.
So Eric, there is another question for you. Bruno is interested in hearing from how do you see the new mount options such as ARRI, LPL, Panasonic, L mount, Canon, RF mount, and if Cooke is planning to adopt any of these new mounts in future building of primes.
We live in a PL world. ARRI invented the PL mount a number of years ago. They've now invented the LPL mount and the XPL mount, for that matter. So now you've got 3 PL mounts, you know, small, medium, and large. And when I joined Cooke a few years back, they were sort of in the midst of experimenting with Micro Four Thirds and Canon EF and a number of things. And there were some technical limitations in terms of the rear design of our lenses, some focal lengths that would have had to have been adjusted. But we didn't get around to doing that, and it was actually pretty simple for the reason. It's not that we couldn't do it. It's just most of our customers weren't interested in going that way. They weren't interested in taking a PL mount lens and going to what would essentially be a still photography mount. It was actually, they were interested in going the other way. They wanted to take still photography lenses and make them PL. And so it just didn't materialize. And I know people are going to argue with that and go, oh, we want to do it, we want to do it. I know that there were a lot of people that wanted to do it, but there weren't, let me be blunt, there weren't a lot of people that were willing to pay for it. And even with LPL, I can count on one hand how many sets I've sold with LPL mounts, you know. It's not a lot. And when you look at that, it's just, for a rental house, if you look at it from a rental house standpoint, it's very limiting. So I've got my Sony and even my Mini, and everything is all PL mount. So if I take a set of lenses that have a short flange focal depth with only an LPL mount, I'm using those on one camera, okay? If I took RS7s and converted those to LPL, and I had this conversation with an individual, I mean, it was done because that's how they were going to live for the feature film, and then immediately as that feature film wrapped, they were going to be converted back to PL and put back into inventory. I think camera manufacturers are trying to do a whole lot right now, and I understand where technology is going, and it's much easier to design a lens with a shorter flange focal depth and a bigger hole in the back. And we are going to get there, absolutely. But I just don't think we're there right now, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that people have 28 camera of whatever camera it is that has a PL mount on it. I mean, some of these rental houses have 300 PL mount cameras. They're not rushing out to buy 300 new sets of lenses. Although I wish they were. They're not. So it's all very new right now. And this almost goes back to what I said about the paradox of choice. There's just so many choices. Honestly, half of my day is spent talking to people about the choices they could be making, because it's all very confusing. But we live in a PL world. We are doing LPL, and our lenses, for the most part, are available in LPL mounts. So if that's the road you want to go on, great. But I think our days of manufacturing Micro Four Thirds or Canon EF or any of these types of things, those are best left to the other manufacturers that will make adapters. And as long as you're starting from a shorter, like the Leica mount or whatever it is, you have the room to get to the 54 millimeters. The problem is if that mount is longer than 54 millimeters, because you can't fit the adapter between it. So there are some technical limitations there. But when you're talking about lenses that are as expensive as Cooke lenses are, people tend to want to stick in that PL or LPL world, we found. So, although there's a lot of discussion about it going the other way, it never seemed to materialize for whatever reason.
I see. And I wanted to introduce a new subject. I'd like you to comment a little on the anamorphic zooms, because we all know zooms are a very controversial subject. A lot of DPs hate it. A lot of people love it. And also the complexity of construction of the lens and size and weight and distortion and all those matters. So if you could talk a little bit about it.
Well, the same people that ask for the EF mounts are usually then saying, "Can you remake the 18-100? That's a great lens," and it is a great lens. But as Les said, everybody that knew how to build those types of zoom lenses at Cooke is no longer there. It was just so long ago. We did build the CXX not too long ago, and that was a single lens. There's a reason why, I think, this is just my own personal opinion, why lens companies tend to either specialize in either spheric or either primes or zooms. And if you really think about that, like Fujinon is a zoom company, Ingenue is a zoom company, Zeiss is a prime company. If you really start to think about it, everybody does kind of fall into one of those two categories. It's just because there couldn't be any different. I mean, building a prime lens and a zoom lens, they're just two totally different animals. And even the way the light reacts. So the whole reason that we have two anamorphic zooms was Cooke's desire to have a full anamorphic program. We wanted a set of zooms to go along with the primes. And if it wasn't for that desire, I don't think that those two lenses would have ever gotten made, because there certainly was not a desire to make the world's most complicated 10 times, zoom lens. It still is in the works. The 35 to 140 is out, but the 45 to 450 is still being dialed in. It probably will be finished relatively soon, but man, it was not an easy lens to make, which is why there were no 10 times anamorphic zooms ever in the world previously constructed, because it's just not a very fun project to undertake. And there's so many other things with us working on that. It takes away from other things that we could be doing, you know. And again, we're limited by the fact that we're a smaller company, that everything is handmade. Everybody would love to see, or a lot of people would like to see the 18 to 100 rebuilt. A lot of people would like to see all sorts of different zoom lenses from us. A lot of people would like to see still photography lenses from Cooke. But those aren't really things that we're going to be doing, at least not in the near term. Our whole focus right now is on high-end cinema lenses. You know, we really live in that spherical and that anamorphic world. And with the advent of all these new camera technologies, specifically full frame, I mean, I think that is where a lot of our development is going to center around for the near future. I mean, will Cooke come out with a full frame spherical zoom at some point? Who knows? You know, if we did come out with a zoom, I can almost guarantee it would be full frame. But I don't even know what decade we can pencil that in for. We're just so busy with everything else.
So it was a very high risk that Cooke took to develop and invest this huge amount of money, I think, on developing a zoom, right?
Well, risk and reward. And I mean, that's also why if you look at the list price of that 45 to 450, it's an $80,000 lens. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
you couldn't see the face
expensive.
I made.
It's 80,000 US dollars. So yeah, it's expensive.
Yeah, it's
But
pretty
again, that is all of the engineering and work. I mean, we've been working on that lens for, as far as I know, at least 4 years, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah.
And then it happened, we had it almost ready. And the hardest thing to do with the zoom almost is the tracking to get that correct. And then we found out that the special coating flare acts differently in a zoom lens than it does in a prime lens. And especially with the 45 to 450. So there was a lot of RGB curve adjustment that was being done on that to get the flares consistent across the range. It's a lot of work, but hopefully it'll show in the set of lenses that are made.
Cool, great. Does anybody have any more questions? Jay, if you have any questions, people who are watching us, if you have any further questions, we're coming to an end. Or if Eric, if you'd like to say something. Jay, go ahead.
No, I'd like to. I'm done. I'm good. Once again, I'm sorry for my English. I'm not practicing very much nowadays, so I read and listen more than talk. So I'm sorry for that, and thank you very much for being invited here. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone's had enough of talking, had enough of me talking today. So.
Yeah, so I would like to thank everybody who participated in this webinar. Thank you, Eric, for being here, Danielle, Jay, and for Ateliê Bucareste being in this, of inviting ACASP to join this. I'd like to thank Diego also for organizing this with us and inviting me to be the moderator of this webinar. And uns últimos recados são que amanhã às 15 horas nós temos a Mesa das AIS, que vai ser muito legal também, de full frame, para desenvolver mais esse tema. E acho que essa live não conseguiu ser retransmitida pelo Facebook, mas vai ficar disponível mais tarde com legendas e acessibilidade em português para aqueles que não puderam acompanhar ou que perderam o começo, né, dessa mesa. Então, I think that's it. Rafa, do you want to come in?
Thank you, everybody. Obrigado.
Obrigada, Eric.
My
Obrigada,
Portuguese
pessoal.
for the day. That's it.
Thanks a lot.
Obrigado a
Thank
todos,
you very
obrigado pelo
much.
convite. Obrigado a Cooke por existir e fabricar lentes tão maravilhosas. Thank you for Cooke for bringing us so beautiful lenses and putting cinematography on a high standard. Thank you, Eric. Obrigado, Giordano, Daniel, Rafael.
Valeu, gente. Obrigado e até a próxima. Thank you, Eric. Até mais, pessoal.
You guys, I hope to see you soon.
Tchau.
Bye, bye.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.